Hey guys, what's up? This is the Airsoft Tech podcast, and this is episode 5. I'm here with Ryan Fisher, the co-host, and we are going to get right into it.
Perfect.
Alright, so the first thing we're going to go over is our recent builds. This is going to be a 10-minute segment, just like we're going to try to be a 10-minute segment, like the previous one, where we just talk about our recent builds. So, I'll let Ryan take this one.
Alright, so one of the most recent builds I am currently attempting is I'm actually rebuilding my own personal DSG. I have some customer builds lined up, but I haven't really done much on them yet, so I'm not going to talk about them too much. My personal DSG, a lot of changed internal parts. Low neck shell, modify 8mm bearings, low neck spring guide, Prometheus M170, SHS 15 tooth, short stroked 8 teeth. Random full cylinder that I polished. I think a JG nylon cylinder head, actually. I'll explain why I still have that later. ZCI air nozzle, garter tappet plate, Siege Tech 10-to-1 DSG set, and I keep changing the motor around. I actually have it on an ANK 28 TPA right now, and I'm really liking that. This setup, I've had this setup for a while. I haven't really been changing all that much. I plan a future change that's going to completely replace almost... Oh, and I have a Spectre Fed in there. I forgot that little important piece. But I have a huge change planned that I'm basically saving funds for. However, the change I'm undergoing right now is actually externals, and that's something I almost never do to guns. I'll buy them, I'll throw on a sight, some rail panels, a suppressor, and I'll just kind of leave it at that. I don't usually actually buy extra... I've never bought a receiver set or a rail, for example, and I bought 2 of those on a whim last week, and I'm waiting for them to come in still. So I guess that's something that I'm going to have to encounter that I usually don't. Like, I've put externals together for customers before countless times, but I never buy any for personal guns.
Same.
I just kind of get them as they are and then throw on like a suppressor and a sight. And then the only more recent customer internal build is I had to do a tune-up for a friend's AUG. I didn't have to do too much. He just supplied a bunch of parts, pretty standard upgrade parts. Aim top piston, I think, actually. Ryan helped me ID that. SHS 13-to-1 gears, ZCI, anti-heat cylinder, no-name, stock, rest of the parts. But I tuned it. Shim, grease, AOE, air seal mods, anything else that I saw it needed, I fixed. I had to fix the wiring in that gun, actually. The contacts kept popping out and semi-auto wasn't working, so that was really annoying to fix on an AUG because these are dual-stage trigger instead of an actual semi-auto selector.
Yeah, I was about to say, I bet that was fun to fix.
Yeah, it was not fun to fix at all. It took me a while to figure out how the dual-stage trigger actually activated full auto. But yeah, I'm waiting for some M-Num material to come in to finish the flat hop on that gun because I bought some, really happy, thinking that I cheated the system. I got it, and it was just not the right material at all, so I have to ship that back tomorrow, actually, and await what I think is the correct material to come in soon. I think that's all I've really been doing lately.
Yeah, I love AUGs, honestly. I want to get one just because, like, when I used to play Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2, that was like my favorite. That was like my favorite gun. I don't know why. That and like the P90. Go figure. So those are like my 2 favorite guns, but the AUG I always wanted one. They're just cool. So my most recent builds, I have a lot. I have right now I'm working on a GMP M4, like one of the old like style of M4s that they made in like Vietnam. And so it's one of those old like VN style M4s, and it's really sweet. It's just a balanced build. I think it's like a 16 TPA motor and 18-to-1 gears and like an M100 spring. It's completely done, and it's getting like 350 to 360 FPS at like 30 RPS, which is sweet. And so that's a cool build. I also have an SVD I'm working on right now. It's a JG SVD. Just had to fix the accuracy problems in it, and it's shooting straight now. And then I have a Masada and a Scar that I'm working on, and those 2 are a pain.
I like those guns.
Yeah, I'm trying to install a Crytek MOSFET into a Scar.
Have fun with that.
Yeah, it doesn't look fun. I haven't even started like trying to install a MOSFET yet. It's just retarded looking. And so I'm gonna have to install that MOSFET, and then I'm going to like put heat shrink around the MOSFET because it's not protected. So that's kind of stupid.
It's just kind of placed in the gearbox. They have a cutout for it, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, it makes sense that they have a cutout for it, and then it wouldn't need protection. But at the same time, like, hello, this just looks bad. And so I'm gonna put some heat shrink around it, and that'll be fine. And then the Masada, I'm DSGing with that SHS DSG. And I've gotten quite a few comments on my channel, people wanting me to review the SHS DSG. And I'm going to soon, but I almost want to finish this build first just to do it so I can actually show it.
Don't buy it. Siege Tech.
Siege Tech all the way. Go. Just Siege Tech. So, yeah, I prefer the Siege Tech over the SHS, but the SHS one's pretty solid. It's just no warranty, and it's not Siege Tech. So it's like buying a knockoff Apple computer.
Yeah.
Which I don't think those really exist, but if they did, you'd be doing that.
If there was a thing.
Yeah, I'd be like, it's like
someone over in China makes
it's
knockoff iPods, iPhones, Macs.
Yeah, it's like when the iPod Touch first came out. There were tons of people trying to mimic the same concept, and they just weren't going anywhere with it. So the iPod kind of ruled that market, and that's why Siege Tech is ruling this market. Because, number one, it works fantastically, it doesn't break. Number two, pretty much an unlimited warranty. And number three, it's just everybody kind of speaks about it nowadays, so it's got that word of mouth a lot. And so whenever you hear DSG, you immediately think Siege Tech. So those two are kind of like coexisting terms.
Kind of like how you call tissues Kleenex by instinct.
I personally don't, but I've heard people do that.
Or kind of things like that. It's just brands that rule the...
Yeah, exactly. So if you were to say like Cheez-Its, but you got off-brand Cheez-Its, they'd still be called Cheez-Its to you. So
screw Cheese Nips.
Yeah, but Cheez Nips. But those are pretty much my most recent builds. I've been working on a lot. Oh, and then I have to mention this one. I got a gun in that, like, it's just beautiful. It's got all these awesome parts in it. But the guy who owns it sent it to a horrible teching company that just did a horrendous job. And I won't mention them because of the being on a podcast right now. But they just did a horrendous job. And so I got the gun in, no AoE correction, no, like, horrible shimming, no air seal, it wasn't even feeding right, and that's impossible to do with Siege Tech gears. I don't know how you messed that up. And the gearbox was misaligned. The Pro and hop unit that came with it was just horribly put together, and it was awful. It was a nightmare. So I'm fixing that up, and it had a Chimera MOSFET in it that was broken. So, fun stuff. But those are my recent builds, and it's torture. But it's getting somewhere.
I think we're still laughing. I think when you said Vietnam, you said Vietnam.
Yeah.
And I can't get that out of my head now.
I did that on purpose.
Okay. I couldn't tell if you're doing that on purpose or not, so.
Vietnam. But yeah, that's a force of habit. Not really, but okay, so short product review. This will be where we talk about a simple product and tear it apart and just hate on it or love on it. So we're talking about ZCI motors. ZCI motors, they're a lot of fun. Huh?
Nothing. Just...
I already know your opinion on these motors, so...
I know you do. I know your opinion on them, so it'll be fun.
Okay, so my take on these motors. They are good if you like putting a couple bullets into a revolver, spinning it, and trying to shoot yourself in the foot. It's kind of... Or no, a better concept. Okay, take the revolver. It's like a 5-shot revolver. Put 2 rounds in it, okay? Spin it and point it at your gearbox. That's what you're doing. Okay? Yeah. So, you're taking a chance, in other words. And with these motors, they're ACM, so they're built in China, and they're not that fantastically built. And so, they have problems, obviously. And personally, I've never experienced an issue with them, and I've probably used 15 or so of them. However, other people that are, just as good at tech as I am have had horrible experiences with them. So it's clearly not just an issue with the teching, it's an issue with the product itself. And I've just gotten extremely lucky, which is contrary to the usual. So, personally, I use their motors and I find them fine. However, like I said, other techs don't. And I know Legacy is one of those techs, so have at it.
Yeah, so I'm on the other end of the spectrum with these motors. I liked your analogy. It's like playing Russian roulette with when you buy anything with the ACM lottery, to matter, not just these ECI motors. Whenever you're buying an ACM product, you have the source manufacturers change all the time. These companies won't announce when that happens. Different generations of gear sets change, meaning they might have a different process of manufacturing them, they might change the design, and they don't tell anyone, they just kind of put them out, and when techs or manufacturers like Clandestine or Brill Armory receive these, they notice, hey, it's different, this must be a new generation or a new version, so it gets labeled as Gen 1, 2, 3, or 4. For example, SHS gears, I think the initial Gen 3 ones were the ones that had the really, really thin, or Gen 2.
Gen 2.
Gen 2 had the really, really thin teeth on the lower part of the bevel, and they stripped in almost every single build, even the more basic builds. Yeah, you're right. Gen 3 was the one where they fixed it. They made other changes as well, but they at least fixed the problem. But like SHS didn't announce to all the vendors that they made a new generation of gears. They just sent them SHS gears, and they happened to be different. And the vendors eventually realized that these looked a little different, and they were stripping in every single build that people bought them from. So then we label it new. The same thing happens with the motors. DCI motors in particular, I have not had the best of luck with them. I personally had 2 of them burn out, and I just stopped buying them. I know my friend Charlie has had 2 or 3 of them burn out on him, and he stopped buying them.
Charlie pushes motors really hard, I will say.
That's fair. He runs them in like 70 round per second TSGs. But
yeah.
Anyway, he has had 2 of them burn out relatively quickly. I've had 2 of them burn out in customer guns. A 30 round per second and like a 28 round per second, 27 round per second build. I know I've had other techs on Airsoft Society forum that I help moderate. They've reported that they work flawlessly, and they've also reported that they just completely failed after the first 400 test shots they were doing with the build.
Yeah.
So I think for me right now, Ryan made a good analogy. It's like Russian roulette. Put the bullet in the chamber, spin the revolver chamber, snap it in, and fire it at your head. And if you get shot, you're screwed. If you don't, you'll have a motor that works. For the price, they still go for like $30, right? The balance and the high torque?
Yes.
So for the price, if you get one that works, it's definitely worth it. However, there's a chance you get 3 in a row that don't work, and now you're out $90 when you could have bought a nicer motor and had it work.
Yeah.
So there's a game you have to play there. Do you risk buying one to get a nice motor that works well for cheap, or do you spend a little extra and buy one that works the same? I mean, it's not the same that like actually will work, but it costs a little more. And the other thing that I personally never buy the DCI high torque is because the JG Blues are some of my favorite motors, and they cost the exact same. So there's no reason for me to take a chance on a DCI high torque when I just buy a JG Blue.
Right.
The problem with that is that until recently they were very hard to find.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they were. Yeah, that's one thing I noticed on Brill. JG,
He carries them now, right?
Yeah, he carries them now. However, and let me pull up a picture real quick. This is interesting. I don't know if JG is like doing something funny, and I haven't really talked with anybody in the community about it. But they have changed the look of the motor itself, like the colors, the can, that kind of stuff. And so, if I remember correctly, the motor, they're labeled JG Blue motor, that is 22 TPA, is actually red end belled. So, yeah, here it is right here. A Golden Eagle, which is pretty much a JG, is a 22 TPA high torque motor. The one on Brill Armory is a red end bell motor. And this is interesting because they've traditionally been blue. However, this one is red. And yep, it's red. It's a about a lighter color red. It comes with the same pinion, same tower, same can, except a red end bell. Now, since the armature and the rest of the internals of the motor are concealed, I can't exactly see those, and I haven't actually bought one of these motors, and I do plan to, just haven't yet.
Yeah, that's really confusing, because JG always had 2 motors. They had a JG Red and a JG Blue.
Exactly.
JG Blue was a 22 TPA, JG Red was a 16 TPA, and I have a JG Red upstairs in my SR25 that I got that in a trade with someone, and I haven't opened it up yet. But now I'm wondering whether I should see if the JG Red is a traditional 16 TPA or if it's one of these newer 22 TPA ones.
See, the thing about them actually is the traditional JG Red motors had metal end bells. They had those, I think they were aluminum, some, mixed motor, metal end bell color. They're like a darker red. And then the JG Blue had a plastic end bell. Personally, I prefer plastic end bells, but it's kind of a negligible concept, so it's not really anything to gripe over. but that's just a preference there. So as long as they're still making that, like the material traditional, then I say that differentiating them will be fine. But because the traditional JG Red ones, like I said, have the metal, and the JG Blues have the plastic. So that's the difference as of now, besides color.
Huh. I'm really interested in that now. I'm gonna go check that tomorrow if I can, because I was planning on the JG Red being 16 TPA, and I was going to dump a lot of money on a new TheAirsofttech gear set to match a 16 TPA motor. And if it turns out to be 22 TPA, I'll be very upset.
You said you have it in your Airsoft 25, right?
Yeah, so I planned on swapping it out into a different gun, but I will just leave it there if it's 22 TPA.
What's the setup on that Airsoft 25?
Right now, it is mostly stock, actually. I haven't touched it inside yet. I got it in a trade. So I bought an old CM that was completely just broken for like $20. I fixed it up. I sold it for a $300 trade value, and then I got an SR25 out of it, so I was happy.
Yeah, I'd say. Because I was going to say, what you could do is you could just pop an 11-1 volt in the gun and see the rate of fire for a split second, and you could.
And that will give me a judgment.
Relatively accurate. However, if it is a 16...
I don't know the ratio of the gears, though, because the stock ones come with like it's more than 18-to-1 ratio.
Well, I think
forget the exact ratio, though.
I think the SR25 ones are 18-to-1, but they obviously have the extended sector gear tooth layout. But the problem with that, with actually popping 11-1 volt in that setup is that you might hit premature engagement. Because it's the 19-tooth system. Yeah. So that's a void alternative. So that's unfortunate. But, okay, about ZCI, let's end this ZCI motor topic. The ZCI motor, like, because we were just talking about love and hate on it, and we both have valid grounds for our point of views, but the factual part of the ZCI motor, what it's constructed out of. Okay, so the ZCI motor does have a plastic gun bell, metal can, and it has the metal tower on for the stabilization of the armature, and then it's got one of these weird steel-style D-type pinions. I prefer their pinions because they're tough and they match pretty well with a lot of things, except XYT bells, which is kind of weird. But
that's weird.
Yeah, it is. It's really weird. I've always gotten the funny sound out of them, but and it's never been worn out. So it's just the sound being produced as a result of the mesh between the bevel and the pinion. So that's kind of weird. But the motor itself seems to be well constructed, and instead of having bearings to support the armature, they have bushings, which is really weird because almost every motor out there comes with bearings. So it's different to see a bushing suspended armature, which is, like I said, kind of unusual. So that's a thing, but I have heard stories of people saying they've broken bearings in motors before, but I never have it. I don't even see how you could do that.
I've never done that either.
Yeah, I mean, you'd have to really get a lemon or really push something hard to do that. So in which case, if you're pushing it hard, something else is probably going to break first. So, yeah. I mean, granted, it happens from here and here. If your motor's a really old motor and it's just wearing out and etc., I guess it happens. But I've personally never experienced it myself. So I'm fine with having bushings, but having bearings, it doesn't matter to me. So either one is fine. And the armature itself is typically where all the problems come from with this motor. I'm willing to bet a lot of Legacy's ZCI burnouts were as a result of the armature, right?
Yeah, it was all the armature.
Yeah, the armature will just tear itself to pieces and rub itself on the can, and just you're done with that motor. And so they're A, poorly wound, B, the covering, like the enamel covering on the wire is really just, it can't withstand any form of heat. So they kind of do that and they just burn up, and then your motor shorts out, causing it to tear up. And so yeah, that's like the reason why the armature itself is kind of a bad option. The rest of the motor is pretty good, honestly. Besides the brushes, they're pretty much spot on with most stock motors. So that's not necessarily a problem, but it can be if you really need good brushes. In which case, you can just replace them with, some brushes elsewhere, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's like the actual ZCI motor, the love and hate on it, and all that good stuff. So, alright. Time for the next topic. The short debate. Short is in parentheses, by the way, on my outline here. You want to take this one, Ryan?
Sure. So, today we're going to be debating Polar Stars versus SMP versus newer upcoming HPA setups, and I appreciate this topic because as techs, we don't often talk about HPA setups because there's not much teching to do other than the actual fitment and alignment of the system, and then it's more just play around with your settings, turn a dial. Anyone who knows nothing about Airsoft can do that on their own. And there's a lot of new products coming out too, so it's good to talk about. And I hope after the debate we can also recap, just like we do with the motor, debate a little bit, fight for sides, and then recap all the facts about everything. Take a third person objective point of view on it. Would you like to start, Ryan, with Polestar?
I was actually counting on you starting with the SMP.
Oh, all right. Just trying to
if you don't mind.
All right, I see how it is. All right. So the reasons why I prefer the SMP, and I am, if you don't know, I own an SMP. I have one installed in an A&K ACR right now, so I am a bit biased towards the SMP styled air system.
He's
over
gone,
the
guys.
Engine styled air system.
He's gone to HPA.
It's terrible, guys. No, but actually, I used it today, actually, and I can't complain. It is my best performing gun, because it's very, all I have to do is the hop-up mods, and everything else is there. Get to the actual debate, though. So, with the SMP, I do like a lot about it. One is where I own multiple different types of guns. If I one day decided that I didn't want my ACR to be the HPA gun anymore, I wanted my SCAR to be the HPA gun, it's extremely easy to swap the SMP system into my SCAR gearbox and just run it. And I take down the ACR, take out the gearbox, swap the nozzle on the SMP, take down the SCAR, take out the gearbox, stuff the SMP in, bolt everything up, and within 25-30 minutes, if I'm taking my time and going slow and making sure I don't miss anything, I will have a completely new HPA gun. And the reason why I like this a lot, so for example, on a classic Army styled SCAR, which includes your D-Boys, Echo 1, your classic Army Sport line and Pro line, and anything else copied off the CA, well, SCAR Ls, by the way, the gearboxes themselves, they are version 2. However, if you ever looked at a version 2 gearbox, underneath the front portion that protrudes with the cylinder and cylinder head, there is a little ring, and the ring is for your magazine release. On SCARs, that ring is cut off. So other than that, it's a regular version 2, but that means in order to fit a gearbox into the gun, you have to cut off that ring. So if I had a fusion engine, for example, and I wanted it in my SCAR, I would have to cut off the ring on the fusion engine, and then the fusion engine is not usable in any other gun after that, because it needs that ring for the magazine catch on ACRs, M4s, SPRs, etc. So those are little things where I can afford to buy a shitty $15 JG gearbox, modify it to fit in my gun, and then still have an HPA system that can be swapped to any gun that I want. And then the other thing too is if I had an M14, for example, now the newer Hydras are going to have the offset nozzles, so it's as simple as a nozzle change, and I have the HPA system in a completely different gun, and I don't have to buy a whole new fusion engine or chop up the one that I have and then not be able to use it in another gun afterward. On top of that, price. The SMP is about $110 cheaper than the fusion engine. I might be wrong. Prices might have updated since I bought mine, and I actually bought mine on sale, so I got mine $210 cheaper than a fusion engine, which came in handy when I was buying my air rig and stuff, because those things are freaking. But it's cheaper, it's easier to use, it's more air efficient with an asterisk next to that, and if Ryan doesn't get into that later, I will. It's a much simpler system as well. So the battery drains a lot less because of the FCU system. Granted, the performance range is not as high as a fusion engine. However, as long as you don't plan on going over 500 FPS or over 40 rounds per second, it can do everything performance-wise the fusion engine can anyway, so it's not a detriment. If you do plan on going over that, for example, if you wanted to troll the local 13-year-olds and shoot 60 rounds a second all the time, or if you were buying this for a DMR, I'm going to be honest, the SMP might not be the right thing for you. And that's another thing I hope to get into the end, is that it's more of like a, does this HPA system fit for you, and is it better or worse? It's not only is it better or worse. So yeah, that's kind of the recap of the SMP. It's more air efficient, it's simpler, it's a much smaller package, it's easier to install, it gives you the ability to swap it between any gun you own if you so choose, and it's cheaper, so it gets you into the HPA world at a lower cost than shelling out for a fusion engine.
Alright, is that your take?
Yeah, I don't think I'm forgetting anything. If I think of something while you're talking, I'll just add it in the end.
Okay, so I'm not too HPA educated, but I've done my research in this past 5 minutes, and I think I'm ready. So, let me start off. Polar Star is the ultimate stamp of utter elitism on your fast helmet. Yes, I said elitism, not elitism, but elitism. That's much different, guys. If you want to be operator, you go Polar Star, especially that American Polar Star setup. It's a beautiful fusion engine.
Sick, actually.
Furthermore, the Polar Star is assembled 100% in the USA, not manufactured, assembled. Keep that in mind. Kids in China didn't make it. We assemble it. Okay, so, furthermore, Polar Star Pros, it's a much more tunable system. It's also tried and tested, a useless thing to say. It's available now, which this is on a forum site that says that about 3 years ago.
Are you reading off forum posts?
Yes, I am. Oh, furthermore, it's 100% engineered in the USA, not even in China, so you're not even playing the ACM lottery here. Jeez, that's worth a $470 price tag, wouldn't you say? Okay, that's basically my bullcrap about Polar Star right there.
It was funny, I liked it.
I will get into the actual thing I do know about Polar Stars. Okay, so the 3 points that I did say about that the Polar Star is more tunable is a true thing. It is more precise. You can get it to a more accurate FPS and not accurate FPS, more precise FPS. So if you want to shoot like directly below 300 because that's your CQB limit, you can get it to shoot like 295. That you can actually do that, and so it's much more of a tunable system by that concept. Another thing with the Polar Star is that it is that drop-in unit where you don't have a whole lot of work. Granted, it does not fit into some receivers very well. Like if you get, like, say, a JG receiver, where they're kind of on the iffy side of the QC for externals, you're going to drop it in, you're probably going to see a lot of wiggle room. And then when you screw the whole thing down, you've got it set, you're probably going to see your fusion engine backed up a bit, and that means that it needs to be shimmed in that receiver, and that can be a bit of a pain if you have no idea what anything about teching is. And so if that's the case, then you might have a little bit of a hard time with it. And so that might be why the SMP has the advantage there, because if you're using a JG gearbox shell to mount your SMP into, then you're going to drop your SMP in, and granted you're going to have to open up the gearbox, but you're basically going to be opening the gearbox, dumping everything out, and putting the SMP in, so it's not going to be that hard per se. I would say just about everybody could do it if they had a little bit of common sense. Not saying it's something that you can't, like, you have to be stupid to do, but I'm saying that it's not hard to do at the same time, which is a good plus for it, really. So the Polar Star, when you drop it in, like I said, it can have issues by setting into the receiver. The SMP doesn't really have that if you're using the same gearbox shell that came with the gun you're putting it into, so you won't really have much of a misalignment. So that's the edge I will give SMP, just off my debate. Other than that, Polar Star doesn't really have a whole lot. Like Ryan said, it is less efficient when it comes down to air than the SMP, which that's for reasons I'm not very aware of. I haven't done much HPA research, but I am aware of that. But other than that, it's very, like I said, it's very precise, very tunable to exactly what you want it to be. You can just do stuff like that with it, and so that's the major edge Polar Star has going for it, in my opinion, and just by obvious fact. And its biggest disappointment and its biggest downfall is the fact that it doesn't fit into a lot of receivers without a little bit of tuning. And so that can be a pain if, like I said, you aren't experienced in teching. So that's my take on it, other than my bullcrap I gave earlier.
Yeah, so just to kind of recap with the whole Polar Star versus SMP thing, because again, I think Polar Star is coming out with the Jack, which is supposed to be the smaller, cheaper SMP. Wolverine is coming out with the Hydra, which is supposed to be the newer, improved SMP, and then Polar Star is coming out with the F1, which is supposed to be every single feature the Hydra has for a little less money, and I think they have a different nozzle type. Like, the way the nozzle works is different than the way the Hydra works, and that's why it's technically different. I have to do more research on that, as they're still coming out with exactly how it works, but as of right now, they look like extremely similar systems. But with all this coming, it's good to talk about. So I know personally from doing a little bit of research on Polar Stars and from owning an SMP, they both come with their own set of issues. Like, there isn't really a, this one's always better, this one's never better.
Yeah.
So, just to go off what Ryan said, Polar Stars are more tunable, but they're not more precise in the tuning. And what I mean by that is that, because I tell you wrong, they are and they're not. So with the SMP, you're literally taking a small screwdriver that they include, and you're turning a dial to adjust your dwell, which is how long how long air will come out of your nozzle, and you adjust your RPS. Sorry about that. And you adjust your FPS solely through the PSI on your tank.
Yeah.
The Polar Star has a lot more settings because of the natural function how it works. It uses a dual poppet system, so you have to program the opening and closing and the time that those poppets are open for, allowing air to pass through. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm not a Polar Star whiz, I believe air is directed to the nozzle to control how far that's forward and back, and then separate air is directed to actually shoot out the nozzle, not so far as the BB. If I'm wrong, feel free to rip me a new one in the comments. I'm not 100% sure on that. That's what I've been able to gather from people talking about Polar Stars. I never really did too much research into them because I don't own one. But because of that function, it naturally uses more air per shot to work, and there naturally needs to be more things tuned, aka more settings to tune for it to even work. So it's not that it's more precise because there's more settings, it's because the nature of how it's built requires more settings. The nature of how the SMP is built doesn't require as many settings because it uses the FPS is directly correlated to the PSI and your barrel length because gases expand. So when you're not using a certain volume set by a cylinder like an AEG, if you have a longer barrel, your FPS naturally will go up with less PSI. Now, the reason why I said I wanted an asterisk next to SMP is more air efficient, because naturally, by design, the SMP is more air efficient. However, Polar Star has a lot more volume at its disposal than an SMP system does, again, because of how it's made. So you can use the Prometheus Neostrike or the Orga wide-bore barrels and take advantage of this FPS bump by more volume in your barrel because of how these HPA systems work as opposed to an AEG system. And you can actually run your rig at a much lower PSI on a Polar Star if you have this certain setup and get the same FPS output as an SMP. So for example, I run my SMP at 80 PSI in a 455mm 6.03 type bore barrel, and I get roughly 440, 450 FPS out of it. Now, if I had a Polar Star setup with the low-flow poppets installed, a red nozzle, everything modded, no air seals anywhere, same length barrel, but an Orga 6.2, 6.23, whatever their wide-bore barrel is, I could probably get that exact same FPS value at around 60 PSI as opposed to 80 PSI. So, again, if you have a certain setup in the Polar Star, you can kind of get the more air-efficient system running, but unless you have a certain setup, the Wolverine SMP will be more air-efficient, just by nature of how the two systems are built. And again, like I said, it's not necessarily one's better than the other. You have to know what you want to use your HPA for, what gun you want to install it in, if you want to switch it between guns, or if you want to install it in a gun and have it sit there, and then what performance you're looking out of it. Because if you know going into the game that you want 550 FPS semi-auto lock sniper, SMP isn't even an option for you because it can barely reach that FPS. The Polar Star is going to be the way to go. If you know that you want to switch it between all your guns, the SMP is going to be the way to go because you don't want to modify the fusion engine and then not have it work in another receiver. So it's more of having a plan beforehand and then researching the pros and cons of each system and what they're meant for, and then buying the appropriate system. And that's the way I look at it, and I tell everyone, because there's a common consensus going around that everyone who owns a Polar Star is a cheating jackass who hikes up their FPS. And there's also a consensus that everyone who owns an SMP is a cheap cop-out that didn't want to buy the Polar Star and wanted HPA. And that's not necessarily true, because both are good in their respective environments for what you need. And I think that's the best way to end this, unless Ryan wants to add something else on there.
Yeah, I'd say that's probably like the best way to end it. However, I do want to point out like one more thing.
Yep.
When it comes down to the technical aspect of comparing the two of them, you look at the SMP, and I'm looking on Evike's site right now, so I'm kind of looking at the overall overhead view of the SMP package. And like I said about it, and this is not, I'm not trying to like just totally recap, but this is the SMP is a system you're going to have to actually kind of piece together a little bit. But it's not something that's going to be super hard, but it's going to take a little bit of work, more of common sense and less of experience, I guess you could say. And so the Polar Star is, I would almost say it's an overall, like, of a technical aspect, it's probably the better, like, hardware system, simply because of it's a one package unit. You don't have to piece it together. Like, by piece it together, I mean install parts, test stuff, and go from like step 1, step 2, step 3.
I completely forgot about that. It's one of the main step of the SMP.
Yeah, like the Polar Star is the drop-in unit, I guess you could say. The SMP is the unit you got to work for to get to work right. Which, hey, if you, like I said, if you have common sense, you can get it to work fine. But the Polar Star is just a literal, almost drop-in unit. It's one whole thing that completes this. It completes the system. So that's the advantage of the Polar Star as well, just by an inherent property of the Polar Star, like the way it's designed, that kind of stuff, compared to the SMP. But like Ryan did say, you want to make sure you can get what you want out of what you're buying. You don't want to just buy a Polar Star and think you're going to be able to switch between all your guns, because that may take.
The best. I want this one, and then it doesn't work for the gun that you want, for example.
Yeah, like it's just it's that kind of thing. You're like saying, oh, Polar Star, I'm going to get a Polar Star and switch it between all my M4 receivers. And little do you know that might take you hours upon hours to do. But you might think it'd be a quick swap before you buy it. But that may not be the case. So that's something you want to take into consideration. But like Ryan said, if you take the SMP, you can easily swap that between all your guns. Granted, it may take an hour of work, but it's not going to have any grinding process like taking shims and shimming a receiver and that kind of thing. So that's not going to be a thing. So that's the advantage that the SMP has. So we can just go back and forth on the advantages and disadvantages of it, but we can agree that they're a system that you have to know what you want before you buy it. You don't have to buy it and then find out what you want. And so, but I do like the thing that Ryan pointed out. He was saying that, and I went Airsoft things one time, and I noticed this. Everybody that ran a Polar Star was like, a lot of people had the mentality that they were just this horrible person that's going to cheat all the time and jack up their FPS and just run at 500 FPS with .40s and just kill everybody. No, I played with some very nice Polar Star users. They're pretty cool. And then everybody, or a lot of people, think that the stereotype is for SMP is that it's just for people that cheap.
That couldn't afford the Polar Star.
Yeah, that couldn't afford the Polar Star, but that's the polar opposite. And so, but when I first heard of the SMP, I kind of thought that I was like, this might be a cheaper version of the Polar Star. I might buy it because I don't want to spend $500. And so, but that's apparently not the case. So that's kind of something cool that is a fact. So interesting.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm glad you pointed that out too, because with the SMP, you do have to know how to take out your own gearbox in your gun, disassemble it, take out all the pieces, degrease it, put the unit in, put the the trigger board in, wire everything together, link up your wires, feed them through, place your gearbox shield down. Then I have a video on my channel about this too. If anyone, I'm not going to get into it here, it's taking up way too much time, and I have all the information there. But you basically have to go through a testing process and making sure everything mates correctly and works before you put it together, because I ran into about seven completely different unrelated problems when I was installing my SMP. And I figured it out because, I noticed the problem right away and I knew what I needed to do to fix it. However, someone that's not necessarily technically inclined might not see it. And that's a problem that you don't see in the Polar Star, where it comes together as a drop-in package. Everything's already put together to work. The issue you see with the Polar Star, not the SMP, is if the thing actually fits in the gun or not. Because the SMP, you're using your stock gearbox shell, so you know it will fit.
Yeah, and I don't want anybody to get the idea that Polar Star doesn't fit into any gun. Like,
Oh, yeah.
it fits into a lot of guns. I've just heard people saying that it doesn't fit into some receivers. And
Yes.
so I'm not saying that it's going to be some painstaking 2.5 hour long process to get your Polar Star to fit into
Hacking
your
away at it
receiver.
with the Dremel.
Yeah, it probably won't, but I mean, I'm just saying that these issues can arise, and
You don't want to go into it blindly.
yeah, and out of all the Polar Star users I've personally face-to-face talked to about their gun, none of them had to work on it to get it to fit. Over the internet, like Facebook, Airsoft teching sites, and Airsoft forums, I've heard of probably 3 to 4 good cases of people spending 2 hours just to get their Polar Star to fit right. And this is 4 cases out of the 100. So, I mean, it's probably not a super common thing, but it's not an unheard of thing either. So don't be freaking out if your Polar Star isn't a total drop-in into your gun. But at the same time, don't be totally fearful to buy a Polar Star and think we're just bashing Polar Star because we said it may take a little bit of modification to get to fit right.
Oh yeah. Now I know, for example, if I was buying an HPA system for an M4 platform, I would have bought a Polar Star engine. It's just, again, it goes back to what did I want it for, what did I need it for. I wanted the ability to use it with my guns. Some of my guns have proprietary gearboxes, so the Polar Star wouldn't allow me to do that.
Yeah.
I didn't need more than 40 rounds per second because I own 3 DSGs. So that was not something that I was too sad that SMP didn't have. So again, it's what do you need, what do you want? And it was convenient that I saved $200+ buying the SMP. So obviously I'm not gonna, that is a con that is there, but it shouldn't just be based off the money. It should be like, what do you need? And then do the research to figure out which one suits your needs.
Right. Alright, so there goes our little debate. We're going to try to make it more of a debate, I guess you could say. We ended up agreeing to disagree, kind of, I guess you could say. Personally,
Yeah.
I prefer the Polar Star unit. I will say I actually do kind of prefer the Polar Star unit. I just like the fact that it's more, like, I can get it to a more precise setting, and then I can get it to a higher FPS, and I can do higher rate of fire. That's just like, if I'm going to go all out on something, I'm going to go all out.
Yeah, that's good. So I spent probably a good $650 on my whole SMP unit. And when you're spending that much money, it does also make sense, like, go big or go home kind of thing. Like,
yeah. But if you can only get what you want out of it, then you're good to go. Alright, so this is the part of the show where we answer each of us will answer a question that we have found. And this one comes from my YouTube page. This is on my most recent Tech Talk Q&A. It is by Xstram. And he asks, how strong are G&G Top Tech version 3s? He's got a build list here of SHS 12-1s, an SHS blue piston, M130 spring, ZCI piston head, standard MOSFET, low X trigger unit, ZCI high torque motor, and stock shell, bushing, cylinder head, and nozzle. He only asked this because he's getting overspent even with the M130 on both the 7.4s and the 11 1-volts, which, and this is quote-unquote, I don't think would happen, so next step is an M140. But I know that is a pretty strong spring compared to stock guns, and I read somewhere, don't remember where, that the Top Tech shells were thinner and weaker up front compared to other shells. Okay, so this question is a little interesting. There's several little questions in here, and it's going to be A, B, C, D kind of thing we're hitting. How strong are G&G Top Tech version 3s? Okay, so G&G's Top Tech shells, if you take a Top Tech shell and you compare it to a combat machine shell, you'll notice very many differences. First off, the combat machine shell is thinner up top. It's a very bad design, let me just say that. It's incredibly weak, it's going to crack almost on any setup. On stock setups, it'll last fine. Put a 1 volt in it, you're probably going to break the gearbox shell pretty quick just because you're pounding it much faster. And so that's the flaw on that gearbox shell, in addition to its material, which is the next point. The material on these shells are just a full zinc pot metal, and it's just horrible. It's not the same metal that JG and D-Boys use. It's a little weaker, but it's also more porous of a metal, which is really stupid. I don't know why they did that. The metal itself, if you take it and you like snap it in half with your hands, which you can do, by the way, you can see little air pockets in the shells. And so that's just a horrible design. If you look really close, you can see those. And that's just part of the bad design of the shell. So those are the two flaws with the shell right off the bat. However, you take the Top Tech one, it's actually built to version 2 spec. So it's the standard, it's got the standard quote-unquote reinforced top. It's not super thin like the combat machine receivers are. So it's relatively tough. I wouldn't say it's something you run it at 40 RPS. You'd probably crack it then. But it's something you can run a stock setup on and a little bit higher. Now, the Top Tech version 3s, I'd say could run an M120, M130 spring easily. If you take a look at a version 3 and you compare it to a version 2, you're going to notice that the version 3 is incredibly beefier, and this is because of just how the shell itself is designed, not because of the material. They use the same material, but one just has so much more reinforcement around it. And so a version 3 Top Tech G&G shell breaking, I'd say, would be pretty rare. I would say run on an M130, M140, and it might be fine with Sorbo. But push it any further, you might crack it. Because believe it or not, version 3s do crack. It just takes quite a bit of force, even on crap version 3s like this one. Now, for the rest of your list, you're doing something that a lot of, and I don't mean to offend you with this, a lot of new techs do. You've got a good list, I will say. SHS 12-1s, SHS Blue, M130, ZCI Piston Head, sure, why not? Apex MOSFET, that's a good one. Low extra trigger unit, pretty sweet. ZCI High Torque, debatable, but if it works for you. But you have stock shell, stock bushing, stock cylinder head, and nozzle. The problem you're going to run into with this setup is you're probably going to inherently get overspin because you're using the stock cutoff lever, which is a problem. Stock cutoff levers, yours is probably worn down. On top of that, you're running a high-speed setup, which means you're going to get overspin much more frequently than on a standard setup. So if your cutoff lever is worn down, it's not going to snap that trigger trolley off quick enough. And so you're going to see overspin and potential double shot. So that's a negative, obviously. My first bit of advice would be to actually get, unless you need the M130 spring, to get an M120 spring and to get a new cutoff lever. And then check some other things, make sure the timing is right, because sometimes the timing between the cutoff lever, the center gear cam, and the trolley is a little bit off. And you can fix that with JB Weld, but that's more of an experience modification that very many people would shy away from. And all that should fix your overspin and get it to where you're comfortable with the little bit of overspin you'll be getting, because you're not going to be able to totally eliminate overspin without extensive modifications unless using like an active braking MOSFET or something like that. So this will stop your overspin and get all that stuff sorted out. And I don't mean to go on, but you do ask another question which I do want to pick out. You said you're asking me to convince you not to buy a 14.8 volt. I would totally advise against that, because a lot of setups, it's completely unnecessary to run a 14.8 volt on unless you're doing it just for the giggles. And in that case, your setup...
Volt for life.
Huh?
14.8 volts for life.
Yes. And your setup isn't even built for that. I would not run SHS 12-1s on 14.8 volt. That just wouldn't work very well for me. I really wouldn't run a ZCI High Torque on a 14.8 volt, and I certainly wouldn't run an Apex Python MOSFET on a 14.8 volt.
No.
Yeah, so this setup's probably going to get you like 45 RPS or something, maybe 40 RPS on a 14.8 volt. So that you're going to immediately hit PME, I'm willing to bet. So that's a bad thing. And your shell will not be able to take that. The version 3 Top Techs, though...
no, that would crack.
Yeah, those version 3s are tough inherently. G&G metal is horrible inherently, so that's a problem there. But yes, version 3 Top Techs, moderately strong. Fix your build list with a good cutoff lever, and don't upgrade to a stronger spring unless it's absolutely necessary. And shy away from the 14.8 volt, at least until you get into the higher TPA, better built motor setups. So that's my question, and that is my answer.
So moving on to my question, really quickly before I say it, Ryan actually reminded me of something I said I would explain earlier. So in the very beginning of the podcast, I said that I have a JG nylon cylinder head in my DSG build still, and the reason I have that is because the nylon plastic actually absorbs a lot more force than a metal cylinder head. So where I have an M170 and later to be an M190 spring, going at 60 rounds a second, hitting that cylinder head, hitting the front of my gearbox, where I have less sorbo than normal because I'm trying to get as much volume as I can in the setup, it puts a lot of strain on the front of the gearbox shell. Now, where I do have a Lonex gearbox shell, I've seen a few of them break before, but it's not very often. However, you never want to risk it, I would say. It's much easier to replace a $5 cylinder head than it is to replace a $50 shell and retune and reshim and refit everything to it. And then even then, it's not going to be the same as you originally tuned it, because everything changes a little. Like you can never change the shell of a gearbox, for example, and get everything exactly as it was before into the new shell. It just doesn't work that way. It's the way things are made. So for example, my setup, it runs a nylon cylinder head and an STS system. I'm trying to take as much strain off it as possible. But a lot of people give me crap, I guess, for running a nylon cylinder head where I have a $100 MOSFET, a $50 shell, $120 gears. I have top-of-the-line parts and everything except for that stupid little cylinder head. And
Basically,
it's a stock
they
cylinder head.
Basically, they want everything shiny.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I bought all the shiny stuff to make it glow and stand out. But,
Me too.
It's because it actually absorbs a lot more force than a metal cylinder head, and it takes more strain off the gearbox shell, which is something I don't want to have to replace. So,
if I could jump in real quick to that.
Yeah, sure.
That's a very good point, because I run one of those in my ICS M16, and it's a good idea if you're just going for absorbing impact, and I agree. It's a fantastic way to go about it. However, there is a counterpoint to this, and which I'm pretty sure you're aware of. And it's just kind of playing devil's advocate, because I almost completely agree with you, but I just want to point this out.
Yep.
When you're using a nylon cylinder head, because it's stock and because it's plastic and because it's two-piece actually, the nozzle is one piece and the cylinder is another, and the cylinder has another piece. They fit in and they glue together. And so what this does is it creates a flaw, because anything that has more parts is inherently, almost always, less reliable, just because it has more parts. Almost always, not always, but almost always. So, what you see with this in high rate of fire setups, and Ryan might have seen this and fixed it in his build, but what happens is the nozzle can sometimes shake side to side, and it can cause FPS issues and sealing issues, and sometimes the glue can completely break off, and you can totally drop FPS. And this is just because of its two-piece design. And so oftentimes, whenever I build a high-speed setup or a stressful setup with a plastic cylinder head, I always punch that nozzle out, re-glue it, and then sink it in, and I let it sit there for a day, and it's solid, and it's not coming undone now because I've fixed that issue. But that's just the counter-argument with that, because a lot of people, myself included, I'll buy the metal cylinder heads just because they're a solid one piece. And so I'm less likely to get an FPS issue. And so I hate to modify things personally, so I'm going to do everything I can to not do that. And so that's just the counter argument to that point. But I'm almost like 90% for the plastic cylinder head, just because of the reasons Ryan said. It's just that sometimes that two-piece design can be kind of irritating.
Yeah, no, I agree. That's a good thing to point out, too. And the other thing with inherently nylon cylinder heads, if you have a worse quality one and you do have a higher setup, especially a higher rated spring, putting more force on it, it can actually start to degrade, hitting against the metal wall of the gearbox shell, and it can either create a spacing between the cylinder head and the gearbox shell, or it can start to pull the cylinder head out of the cylinder. It can mess with your seal. It can do a lot of minute things. However, again, on that point, I'd much rather replace a $5 to $10 cylinder head than replace a $50 shell and have to retune everything for it. So that is why I usually will go with those in higher stress setups. But then, like Ryan said with the nozzle too, inherently it's a brass tube that they punch into a nylon circle, basically, and they just fit it with glue, and that's how it sticks there.
Ooh.
So it can move and become free, and it will mess up your consistency, and it will mess up your FPS.
You know what we need to do?
Hmm?
We need to take a G&G version 3 shell, take a plastic cylinder head, slam an M190 spring into a full stroke, and run it and see which one breaks first, the cylinder head or the gearbox shell.
The shell. I actually have a JG gearbox shell running an M170 DSG right now.
Swag.
And it's been for a while. It's my gun I built for my little brother.
Oh, his DSG?
I've been running that for about a year now, and I haven't had any problems with any of the parts so far, so I'm pleasantly surprised.
It's a nice build. I like it.
Yeah. Anyway, I still haven't got to my question yet. The question I wanted to answer, hopefully this will be the last thing. It's probably running a little late. We always do this. But I get a lot of questions, or people, not necessarily questions, people just asking me, what are the telltale signs of, like, a bad tech? So how do you know that the person at your local field talking about airsoft guns and offering teching services actually knows what he's doing? Because a lot of the times, people can go on YouTube and people can read forums, and they can gain a lot of, like, a wide variety of general knowledge relatively quickly, but then not know either further into those topics or how to actually do them.
Yeah, right.
So it's very, very common for people especially newer techs, to read a lot of stuff on Facebook groups or on forums or watch 10 YouTube videos every other night and learn a lot of cool concepts and stuff around teching to the point where they can talk about, they can talk a little bit about a lot of things in like a wide general spectrum. However, not only have they never done it, they don't know how it's done. It's like if you sit down and you watch your dad work on your car, and he fixes part of your car. It doesn't make you a master at doing that. It doesn't make you able to do it, but you can talk about it. You can say, oh yeah, he replaced the radiator or whatever. I'm just spewing out random crap. But the problem with this is that then these kids go to their local fields and they talk about the teching stuff, and people who know nothing about teching will obviously take anything they say as truth, because if you have no basis to deny someone and call them out on it, you're not going to be able to deny them or call them out on it. You're just going to believe what they say. And then when that person who has just read forums for the last week and before that week didn't even know what an airsoft gun was, is now taking money and doing tech work, this is where I actually get most of my customers, is because I have relatively high prices for a tech, I'm not going to lie. I don't charge a fortune, but I'm not cheap.
Same here.
I think I'm actually I'm a lot more expensive actually than a lot of the other people on my forum. So not necessarily my forum. This isn't where the story's coming from, but it's more locally. But a lot of the local techs are cheaper than I am, and what people do is most of my customers, they'll go to a local tech, get their gun back, realize it's not really working the way they feel like it should be after they paid money, then they'll come to me. I'll get it working properly for them, and they're happy with what I did, but it turns out they wasted all the money they gave that other tech working on it, because not only did he not actually do what he was supposed to do, however, everything he did was null and void, because when I get the gun, I do a complete re-grease, re-clean, I take everything out, I put it back in, I tune everything myself. I don't leave anything left that I was given with. So he could have given me a gun with no shims in it, with a crap ton of Chinese grease in it, or he could have given me a gun that Ryan had worked on. I'm going to treat them all the same way. I'm going to take them out completely and make sure I know what I'm working with and I do it to my specs.
Right.
So he completely threw away the $75, $80 he paid this other guy to put it together, and he didn't even do the things he said he was going to do because he didn't know how to do them. I think, like Ryan started talking about earlier, he was getting the gun from a customer who had just gone to a tech that completely messed up everything in it. I get these way too often, and one of the things, it's hard because with any business, especially if you work on cars, for example, you go to a car mechanic, you bring your car in that's broken, he tells you what's wrong, he tells you what it costs, and he tells you what he has to do to fix it and what parts you need to buy. If you are a car mechanic, you have no knowledge on the topic, so you don't know if what he's saying is bullshit or if it's true. And as a consumer, you have to believe it's true because you have no basis to argue him.
Exactly, or else you wouldn't be going to him for advice.
Yeah, and the other thing is that you also can't judge how good his work is because you don't know what he was supposed to do or how the end product was supposed to perform, for example. So until you get another person that does have knowledge in the field, you have no way to compare or no way to say, hey, that's not right. So too many times it will come down to people using Ryan or I, for example, as second techs, kind of in wasting money. And it's hard. It's really hard to figure out if someone's truthful or not. However, the main things that I will always tell you, you have to ask the person, especially if you're giving money. First of all, you have to make them show you a gun they've built personally. If they're at your field and they're spewing off all this knowledge they read online and telling you, oh yeah, it's the cutoff lever because this is wrong, because they saw a YouTube video that some tech put out and they remembered that fact.
Brian from Echo One. Brian from Echo One.
Yes. So that it's all really good that they know that, but can they actually build? Can they actually do it themselves? Make them show you a gun that they put together themselves. Second, make them show you their customer base. I mean, if they're a real tech, they're going to be on Facebook or forums or YouTube. They're going to have something. Or if they're local, they're going to be able to give you the contact number or the Facebook account of people they've done work for as proof. On Facebook, if you've ever done a Facebook, if you've sold anything on Facebook forums, it's called vouchers. It's the same thing. get the vouchers from the person. Ask your tech, well, whose gun here have you worked on? Is it someone here today? Can I listen to it? Can I see what it does? Can I see what you're capable of building? Or if no one's here, give me the Facebook account and I'll message them and I'll see if they were happy with it. Things like that. Like, you have to go out of your way to make sure this guy is legit, because it's sad, but where it's a hobby, there is no Meineke Airsoft store where there's one in every other town in Massachusetts or whatever state you live in, and they have reputable techs who will work on your gun for you and are checked and are guaranteed to know what they're doing. It's just not like that. It's sad, but that's how it is. It's a hobby. It's not a real profitable business for the most part. So these are just little steps that you have to go out of your way to make sure that he has built his own personal guns. If he doesn't build his own personal guns, he's not a tech. If I send all my guns to Charlie and Ryan, two of my friends, to build for me, and then go around and gloat about them, I'm not a tech. Yeah. I just have money. If I haven't built any of the guns for the local field, I'm not a tech, unless I then have, for example, I can give you contacts of people that I have built guns with. If I don't have an online account, Facebook, Instagram, Airsoft forums, YouTube, you have to find to check on their work and to make sure that they're not lying. And it's hard and it's painstaking and it's rude kind of to say, oh, I don't believe you, prove it. But you have to do that, because in the end of the day, would you rather be looking at yourself 3 weeks later, $90 short, with a gun that works worse than it did before because you put it together wrong? Or would you rather have had that 1 5-second long awkward encounter where you challenged him and made him prove that he knows what he's talking about?
Yeah, and very, very good points. That's basically everything I would have said. Because, like you said, this is a hobby. This happens. So it's not something like mechanics. Like, I go down to AutoZone and they know how to change my oil. That's just kind of how. That's a very basic thing. So airsoft tech and shimming is a very basic thing that is also very eluding to some people. So they say, yeah, I can shim because I watched a 10-minute AST Kilo 23 video and I know how to shim now. So that's not how it works. Shimming is something that took me.
But I saw the video and I followed the guy perfectly. Why does it sound so shitty right now?
Well, I mean, if you put 0.2 millimeter shims on each side, and then adjust your motor height accordingly, it'll be fine. But it takes experience to do a lot of this stuff, because, believe it or not, a lot of stuff on the internet is a load of crap. So I mean, you're not going to find a whole lot on the internet except through like forums and stuff like that. Do your own research. So this leaves you to the average person who is the tech that says they know what they were doing, and you got to figure it out from there. And so I've had people, like, at fields, I'll talk about my guns, and they'll kind of think I'm just blowing a bunch of crap around, and then I'll pull out the gun and actually show them that it does function the way I say it does. It's not just me blowing smoke. It's actually facts. And so, personally, I don't find it rude when somebody asks me, hey, does your gun actually do that, or do you have vouchers to prove that? Because I kind of find that as like a proving ground, because, number one, I really do know how to tech. It's not something I'm making up. So when I say, like, yeah, my gun shoots 40 RPS, and somebody challenges that, I don't get all steamed up and hot, because I know my guns do perform like that. They perform fine. So if my guns didn't perform fine, I would probably get hot-headed and stuff like that, and then try to defend myself from there.
Yeah. But it's always terrible when you pull your gun to prove it, and your piston strips right in front of a crowd, and it's like, oh shit, how do I explain this one?
Bad AoE, then they're all like, yeah, bad AoE, huh? But, yes, I mean, you gotta do your research, and that's kinda hard to do, but with the internet and all that stuff nowadays, you can very easily go on Facebook, tag the guy, and say, has anybody hired this guy for tech work? If so, what are your experiences? And then you'll get flooded with messages of his experiences, because people are gonna either love to brag about him, or love to hate on him. Exactly.
They got shit on and lost money.
Exactly. So there is almost no risk involved in saying, what are your vouchers? What is your proof? Because you need that if you're putting your money into them. So, yeah, I agree fully. That's just how it is. But, yeah.
Yeah, just two more things that I thought of while you were talking. one, just going off exactly what Ryan just said with going outside external sources and trying to track the guy down. Don't be afraid if the guy, for example, the most common times I see this is at local fields. If you approach a seemingly knowledgeable tech, I'll use quotations and use the term lightly, at your local field, don't be afraid to say, can I have your number or your Facebook account, and I'll message you in the next week if I want this done or not. And then go home, research them on forums, on IG, YouTube, Facebook, post on Facebook. Has anyone worked with this guy before? Like Ryan said, they'll either love to hate about him or they'll love to brag about it because their gun works really well. And then now you have the information you need to then recontact the person and say, yes, I'd like to go forward, or no, never mind, I found someone else, or make up any lie you want just to get out of the situation. But it saves you time and money and a headache later. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that a guy I love by the name of screen name of SD Sport on forums, and he has a Facebook as well. But he was helping me strategically remove the roll pins for the AR trigger guards because I hate those things and I break receivers sometimes.
Lipos.
Well, yeah, but what he was telling me is that we were talking about it for a while, and he said, just remember, at the end of the day, you're listening to some random guy over the internet you've never met before, and you have no idea who this is, and he's telling you what to do. Mm-hmm. So, just going off that point, at the end of the day, don't base every piece of technology you have off of one source. Because not only is there a chance it's wrong, there's also a chance it's outdated. So, yeah. I'll use the example Ryan used earlier with shimming. Shimming, there's a lot of different methods to shim, and it's kind of evolved.
Mine's the best way.
Harmless self-plug. But there's a lot of different methods to shimming. They have a half-shell method that I used to use, Ryan's method, which is very similar but a little different, that I actually use. I mostly follow what he does now, and I shim guns as well. Then there's the spur method or the step gear method, where you shim that as low as possible. That's considered outdated now. But for example, there are still videos on YouTube that guide you through shimming with that method. So even though they're not wrong, it's outdated, and it's not the most efficient way to shim a gun anymore.
Yeah.
So if there's a combination of false information and outdated information on the internet. So another thing you'll find when you're researching this stuff is multiple sources. If you search the same thing and click on 5 different links, and out of the 5 links you get 3 different answers, you have to keep searching which ones were wrong, which ones were the outliers, and which ones are outdated, if any.
Yeah.
It's not... I go over this in a lot of the guides that I write and the tech and stuff, but there is never going to be a pure one-answer way to achieve a goal ever in teching. Never. There's always not only multiple ways to achieve the goal, but there's going to be better and worse and outdated and new, and even the current one is going to be outdated to one that might be discovered in a year. And who's going to discover that? Any one of us can discover it. So don't always succumb to the idea that just because this guy on the forum is a moderator, so everything he says must be right, that it's the only way to do it. And don't, I guess, base all the facts that you go and then spew out based on that one post you read, because you have no idea on the legitimacy behind what the poster was saying. Right.
That's a really good thing. I know this is kind of off topic to what we were saying and all, but yeah, there's a lot of different things out there, and you really have to do your research. I don't mean to get further into off-topic land, but I get a lot of questions too, people asking me, like, hey, how do I get into teching? I really want to do the same thing you do. Or they're like, hey, how'd you get so good at this? Or how'd you get so good at that? And so I get those questions a lot. I'm almost certain Ryan gets those questions as well on his YouTube page, where he has his 70 RPS DSG build. That thing has, like, thousands of views. And there's almost every single comment is, how do I do this? So, I mean, there's...
I had a guy commented on that and said, can you link me to the place you bought this? Thanks.
Yeah, exactly. And so there's so many people that are so far out of the loop, and then there are so many people that are like just enough in the loop where they know what a DSG is, and they kind of know how to do it, but they don't know how to do it. So you get a lot of stuff like that. And so a lot of things in airsoft teching and almost anything else in the world is learned by experience, because this isn't a fully concrete, centralized hobby. And so if you're going to work on a car, there's a right way to do it. If you're going to work on an airplane, there's a right way to do it. If you're going to work on a boat, guess what? There's a right way to do it. If you're going to work on an airsoft gun, there's certainly a right way to do it, but where are you going to find that right way? Most often you're going to find it through experience. And so when I first started teching, I learned almost everything through experience. I was reading shimming guides up and down. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. There's a better way to do this. And so I sat down and figured out my own method. And so it's always worked for me, because I just sat down. I was like, okay, there's got to be a better way. I sat down for a good 3 hours and figured something out. And I was like, okay, this should work. Tried it, and it worked. But it took a lot of time to actually get that. And so a lot of people don't have the patience, and you need that. But a lot of this, like I said, is experience, and almost none of it is actual, concrete, centralized facts. Granted, there are facts in airsoft, but where are you going to find them?
I like how you said patience, because that's one of the things that people underestimate, where they come into teching, they see all these build threads, they see all these people talking about the parts they bought, and they spend $200 on parts expecting to put it together, and then when it doesn't work right, because they never teched before, they come close to throwing the whole thing out the window.
Yeah.
And I know I've been pissed off at guns before plenty of times.
Oh, same.
It's one of those things where you have to sit down, you have to tell yourself it's going to work in the end, and if you need to concede and say, I don't know how to fix this, go back online, do some more research.
Right.
If it's not working, you're missing something, so make sure you go over all the options and get the help you need, because it's not something that you'll be able to sit down and get it right first time. Even today, I still have to, when I build a gun, very often I have to take it apart again and readjust something that I didn't get right the first time. Like, it's not something that you have to expect yourself to just be able to sit down for a 2-hour period and have a gun performing perfectly how you want it. It's just not how it works. Mm-hmm. Like, obviously, sometimes you get lucky. Sometimes there are no problems. I think I've only had 2 guns I've ever built in my life where I sat down, I spent about an hour and a half of work on it, I tested it, and my initial test was exactly how I wanted to perform. Yeah. Out of the hundreds of guns I've built, probably 2 of them I've had to do that. Every other one I've had to take back down and readjust something afterward, or fix a problem that occurred that I didn't think would occur. It's natural, and if you don't have that patience, you're not going to get anywhere, because it's not going to work right away. It's just how it is.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. But that's all the time we have today. This is probably well over 40 minutes. But I feel like this was a very good podcast, and we will certainly do it again next week. So I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you guys enjoyed our outline and our little debate, I guess you could say, our short product review, and our questions that were answered. So if you guys enjoyed this, tell me in the comments. If you didn't, or if you want something to change, you can go over to Airsoft Society, where Ryan, under the username of Legacy Airsoft, has posted a thread. I don't know the exact thread location. Did you post that like in the videos and stuff?
The general Airsoft discussion. It's under the forum boards in that location.
All right, and then so you can find it right there, and then so you've got all kinds of stuff. You can go on here. You can ask us questions, and we'll throw it in the podcast if we think it's something that we were willing to spend a lot of time into, because we're hoping we're going to get a lot of questions, and so we can sort out through them and answer the one that's requested the most or whatever. So we'll go from there to see how it works. Like I said, if you like this, go to Airsoft Society. If you don't have an account, create one, and start talking on threads, do your own research, because there's a lot of information on this site about teching, gear, general airsoft, and then you can ask us questions, and hopefully we'll get them answered. So I hope you guys enjoyed this, and we will see you next time.
All right, see you guys.